Well, good morning. It is such a pleasure and a privilege to be here and standing where I am. I want to thank you, Pastor Chris, for the invitation. Thank you and John for your leadership. Jay, thank you for choosing Come to the Table, and worship team, thank you so much. And it really is inspiring to see where St. Andrews has come. And all that you're part of, and the witness that St. Andrews makes in the community and in the world, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ, the outreach, the stand for justice, including welcoming everybody, and as you go out and see the ministry fair, the ways that you can be involved too and be engaged in the process of reaching others. It's truly incredible. Because I think back on it, of where we've been. I'm Al Winseman. I am the founding pastor of St. Andrews. And that's a very humbling experience. Well, thank you. And thank you. I see some familiar faces here who've been here since the beginning or have come back just for this occasion. It's great to see you all. Most of you have no idea who I am. And I'm glad. No, I am. I'm glad because that's how it should be. That's how it should be. Here, 33 years after Charter Sunday, that's how it should be, because inviting has always been part of the DNA of St. Andrews from the very beginning. It starts with the Nebraska Annual Conference, one of the precursors to the Great Plains Conference, and their desire to start planting new churches. And this was the first one, and I was appointed in 1991 to what I like to say is a vacant lot and a phone book. Now, yes, there is a phone book. Some of you are saying, phone book? What is a phone book? And others are saying, I haven't seen one of those in years. Remember, this was 1991. This was before social media, before you could Google anything. Before Google, by the way. If you want to make a phone call, you had to find an actual phone. We called them landlines now. It wasn't a landline back then. It was just the phone or a payphone. And you had to look up the number you wanted to call in the phone book. That's how long ago this was, 1991. So vacant lot and a phone book, but we didn't use the phone book. Because what our research showed us was more effective than telemarketing, which was a big deal at the time, was direct mail. Direct mail. So we sent out an invitation. We sent out an invitation postcard to the 6 zip codes from 102nd Street West. Over 44,000 households, to invite them to be part of a new church plant. And from that, we pulled those together and we looked at them. We got a number of people who said, yeah, put me on the mailing list. Keep me up to date with what's going on. And from those responses, we put together our leadership team. And if you have ever been to the outside, going into the offices, just there by the office door, take a moment to look at these folks, because they were the pioneers. This is the leadership team that helped us do the planning. And so we did the planning, and we had our first service was actually Christmas Eve at Millard North High School, and we invited people to be part of that. We did our inviting through something called radio. Before the days of Spotify or Pandora, you had to actually tune in to an actual radio station if you wanted to listen to music or anything broadcast through the airwaves. I know, it's a long time ago. But we advertised, and we invited people. And over 250 people showed up to Millard North High School, to the auditorium for that first Christmas Eve. We say, hey, if you want to still be part of this, if you want to be part of this going forward, let us know. And then we had food, fun, and fellowship nights. Once a month at Faith Westwood United Methodist Church in their fellowship hall, and between 50 and 100 people would show up for those monthly food, fun, and fellowship nights that the leadership team planned, and we kept them up to date on the plans because we were going to launch officially Sunday services the Sunday before Easter. Because if you do that, you avoid a second Sunday slump. So we had so that's what we were planning. And also during that process is where the name St. Andrews came from. So here's where we got that, because I understand there are a lot of rumors how we got this. No, we didn't name ourselves after the golf course because our original lot was on a golf course, and we didn't know. It has nothing to do with that. The leadership team, we came up with some possibilities, and we sent them out to everybody who'd been part of things going on and say, what do you think? If you've got some ideas, let us know, because we're going to vote. We're going to vote on the name of this new church. And one of the things we came up with, we decided St. Andrews would be one of the options, is because of inviting. Andrew was the first disciple, and he invited his brother Peter to come and see. And so St. Andrews, we put that as part of it. There were a couple of other ones that I don't recall right now what they were. But we left voting open for a week. On the very last day of voting, a whole slew of ballots came in for St. Andrews, and that's how we became St. Andrews. So inviting is part of who we are. It's who we are. And we would have, when we were in those early stages, finding out if people wanted to be part of St. Andrews, we asked them to go to an inquirer's class to find out a little bit more about what you might be getting into. And we'd always ask, how did you hear about us? Overwhelmingly, the answer was, someone invited them. Somebody invited us to come and see. And that's what happened. And through the time that we were here, from 1991 to 1998, when we took a look in 1998, what we discovered was of our members and of our regular attenders, 76% were formerly unchurched. Inviting. That's what it's about what we've been part of all these years, inviting people to come and see. Now, Jesus had some things to say about inviting, and one of his best-known parables is about inviting. It's the parable of the great banquet. Now, Jesus told this parable, we think, on two occasions. We see it recorded in Matthew and also in Luke. And in Matthew's gospel, this story of the great banquet comes during Jesus' last week before his crucifixion, during Holy Week. And Matthew records it, Jesus telling the story. It is a very, very pointed critique of the Pharisees. But in Luke's gospel, it comes a little earlier. Before Jesus gets to Jerusalem. It's much more subtle, and I think much more relevant for us. So let's take a look. It begins really earlier, before the entry, and it's part of what we call in Luke's gospel the journey to Jerusalem. In the 9th chapter, verse 51, Luke tells us that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. And then over half the Gospel of Luke is that journey to Jerusalem. Up until the end of chapter 19 is that journey to Jerusalem. And all through this journey to Jerusalem, the tension is ratcheting up. The pressure is building. Things aren't going well. And so he tells his story. So let's begin. Let's take a look at Luke, the 14th chapter. And let's start with verses 1 through 6 to kind of set the stage here. Luke tells us this. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. Just then in front of him there was a man who had edema. And Jesus asked the experts in the law and the Pharisees, "Is it lawful to cure people on the Sabbath or not?" But they were silent. So Jesus took him and healed him and sent him away. Then he said to them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that has fallen into a well, would you not immediately pull it out on the Sabbath day?" And they could not reply to this. So Jesus is invited essentially to Sunday dinner. Now this wasn't Jesus is in town, we need to invite him to come to Sunday dinner with all of us. No, this was, Jesus is in town. We better keep our eye on him. Let's invite him to dinner. Because already things weren't going well. And there was just before this, there was another healing that Jesus performed on the Sabbath, a crippled woman, and he healed her on the Sabbath day. And the Pharisees and the lawyers were grumbling against him, saying, he shouldn't be doing this. It's the Sabbath, and this goes against all of our laws. So this is fresh on everybody's mind. And so Jesus does the same thing. A man with edema, that's the swelling in his legs and face and arms, is showing up. And Jesus heals him on the Sabbath. And he poses the question, which one of you, if you have a child or an ox has fallen down a well, would you not on the Sabbath pull him out They didn't respond. You see, the point that Jesus is making with those questions is God's law of love and compassion supersedes the self-righteousness and legalism of the Pharisees. God's law was love and compassion. And so things are not off to a great start in the comfort level realm here in this parable, at this dinner. And so Jesus then, in verses 7 through 11, says this. Luke tells us, when he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. He said, now when you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, don't sit at the places of honor in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host, and the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, hey, listen, give up your place. And then, in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, Jesus said, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. In other words, Jesus says, don't be advancing your own cause. Take the place at the lowest seat at the table. Now we hear Jesus saying, yes, you tell them, Jesus, yeah, they need to be more humble. Those Pharisees, yes, you give them what for, Jesus, because you know what? We would always take that lowest place at the table. Yeah, don't be so quick to go there. A research study done in 1961, a long time ago, and the results are still valid and replicable even today. So this research project asked ordinary people to send extremely painful electric shocks to a total stranger. Now, unbeknownst to the participants, the fake shocks were only being delivered to an actor. So, nobody was harmed in the making of this film. Anyway, a staggering 65% of the participants went along with it. 65%. Now, most of us are confident that we would have been in the 35% who refused to go along with this. We would say, no, we would never do that. But in his essay, You're Not as Virtuous as You Think, Nitin Noria, the former dean of the Harvard Business School, has a name for this gap between how people believe they would behave and how they actually behave. He calls it moral overconfidence. Noria insightfully notes our need for repentance and confession. He writes, in the lab, in the classroom, and beyond, we tend to be less virtuous than we think we are. And a little more humility could benefit us all. Moral overconfidence is on display, Noria writes, in politics, in business, in sports, really in all aspects of life. There are political candidates who say they won't use attack ads until late in the race. Their moral overconfidence is in line with what studies find to be our generally inflated view of ourselves. We rate ourselves as above average drivers, investors, and employees, even though that's statistically impossible. Not everybody's above average, except us. We also tend to believe that we are less likely than the typical person to exhibit negative qualities or to experience negative life events. Yep, we're not quite as virtuous as we think, and a little humility would do us all some good. Now, speaking of humility, how many of you out there are Buffalo Bills fans? I know we're in Chiefs. Okay, I see a couple. It's okay. We're in Chiefs territory, but we're okay. It's fine. And you know what I mean. If you're a Buffalo Bills fan, about kind of the long-standing misery of the Buffalo Bills and the record that they hold of losing, not just making 4 Super Bowls in a row, which is really pretty cool, but losing 4 Super Bowls in a row. Well, in 1994. After losing the 4th the fourth straight Super Bowl. Thurman Thomas, if you recall Thurman Thomas, he was a running back. He had his head bowed and his hands covering his face, sitting on the bench, following that fourth Super Bowl loss. His 3 fumbles that day helped seal the fate of his Buffalo Bills. Suddenly, standing before him was the Dallas Cowboys star running back, Emmitt Smith. Now, did Emmitt Smith do the chest thumping, say, "We got you and we beat you"? No. It was amazing. He was holding his young goddaughter. And he turned to his goddaughter and he said, "I want you to meet the greatest running back in the NFL. This is Mr. Thurman Thomas." Emmitt Smith had just won the Super Bowl MVP. But instead, he wanted to point out the greatness of others. You see, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Those who humble themselves will be exalted, and those who exalt themselves will be humbled. So then he turns to the host. He says to the host, and this is verses 12 through 14, Jesus said to the one who invited him, "So when you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends or your brothers and sisters or your relatives or your rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. And you will be blessed, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Well, things kind of went quiet there. Because Jesus is saying, hey, don't invite the usual suspects. Instead, invite the outcasts, the marginalized. Invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. And why things were so quiet after that among Jesus, the crowd who was gathered there at dinner? Well, these are Pharisees. And Jesus just listed off the types of people Pharisees could not associate with. Not only could they not associate with them, they're outside the temple. They were not allowed in the temple. They were outside of God's presence, and yet Jesus is saying, don't invite the people you normally hang out with. Invite those who are the outcasts. Yeah, the Pharisees wouldn't associate with them, and they certainly wouldn't invite them to dinner. And so while this is going on, we've got the tension rising here. Jesus is saying things. The Pharisees, you can just kind of see them. And they're thinking, why did you invite this guy to dinner? This is not pleasant. Well, one of the dinner guests, and I'm assuming noticing the tension, tried to lighten things up by talking about religion. That always goes well, doesn't it? Yeah. He says in verse 15, he says to him, oh, blessed is anyone who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. Yeah, Jesus, I can just see him going, you didn't say that, did you? You just didn't get this at all. This is someone who, in the words of my grandmother would say, who has so much heaven on their minds, they're no earthly good. Yeah. Oh, man. So, these are individuals, and the person who did the interrupting, and a lot of the Pharisees too, they like thinking about and they like talking about the kingdom, but their actions don't reflect a kingdom life. You see, Jesus is among the Pharisees, and one of the things that we do know about Jesus, from all that we read in all four Gospels, is Jesus had a problem with self-righteousness. That was probably the one thing he could not abide, was self-righteousness. The people who think they're better than others. The people think that we're on the in and the others on the out. And we want to keep those on the outside away. Keep them away from us because we're the insiders and we really know what's going on and we're so much better than everybody else. And Jesus told parables to point out the hypocrisy of the self-righteous. The Good Samaritan, one of Jesus' most famous, most popular parables, the man who is attacked by robbers on the side of the road, who walks by? The self-righteous, the priest, the Levite, the Pharisees, but who stops? A hated Samaritan. Oh, and then one of my favorite Jesus jabs at self-righteousness, the story, the parable that Jesus tells of the Pharisee and the tax collector in the temple praying. And the Pharisee prays, "Oh God, I thank you. I am not like that horrible tax collector over there. Thank you so much that I'm not like him." Well, the tax collector stands a far ways off, barely looking up. "Have mercy upon me, God, sinner that I am." Yeah. So Jesus kind of understands some of the things that are going on here, and he says, okay, we got to tell this again. So verses 16 through 20, Jesus said to him, he said, okay, someone gave a great dinner and invited many. Now at the time for dinner, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is ready now." But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, "Oh, I've bought a piece of land, and I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets." And another said, "I've bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm going to try them out. Please accept my regrets." And another said, "Oh, I've just been married, and therefore I cannot come." So Jesus, telling the story, is pointing out some things that the Pharisees probably got. Because Jesus isn't just talking about the little dinner group that's going on there, but he's expanding, because what he's talking about is the role of the prophets, which all the Pharisees knew about, who were calling Israel back, but Israel wouldn't listen. Yeah, those who were originally invited, the inner circle, the chosen people, the pious. And why can't they come? Well, in and of themselves, these are not bad reasons. It's just that those earthly concerns, Jesus says, are far more important to them than being part of the heavenly banquet. Verse 21. So, the slave returned to his master, and the owner of the house became angry and said to his slave, "Go out at once into the streets and the lanes of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame." There's that quartet again. Those people who are outside, according to Pharisaical Judaism, outside of God's grace, outside of God's blessing, bring them in. They're going to be invited to the table. They're going to be here. And the slave said, "Sir," in verses 22 through 24, "what you'd ordered has been done, and there is still room." Then the master said to his slave, and this part really scandalizes the Pharisees, "Go out into the roads and the lanes and compel people to come in so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those who are invited will taste my dinner." But now it's not just people who are kind of in the bounds of Judaism of the time, who are kind of the outcasts. We're still part of the community, kind of on the outcast side. No. We're talking about the highways and the lanes and the byways. Get outside the boundaries and invite everybody in the world to be part of the heavenly banquet, even those who are outside of what you all would consider to be the insiders. No. It's not just us. It's everybody. And that's the scandalous part. Everyone's invited. Everyone's invited. The invitation is to all. Is to all. And that's who we should invite. Mark Buchanan, in an article that he writes called "Messy, Costly, Dirty Ministry," talks about an experience that he had at Brooklyn Tabernacle. Mark says it felt like skydiving into a tornado, exhausting and exhilarating all at once. I'd read about the meeting in Pastor Jim Cymbala's book, Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire, but nothing, he said, prepared me for the event itself. 3,500 God-hungry people storming heaven for 2 hours. Well, afterwards, he said, my friend and I went out to dinner with the Cymbalas, and in the course of the meal, Jim turned to me and said, "Mark, do you know what the number one sin of the church in America is?" Well, Mark says, I wasn't sure, and it was a rhetorical question anyhow because Jim was going to answer it. He named 2 or 3 candidates for the worst sin, all of which he dismissed. The number one sin of the church in America, he said, is that its pastors and leaders are not on their knees crying out to God, bring us the drug addicted, bring us the prostitutes, bring us the destitute, bring us the gang leaders, bring us the people nobody else wants, only you whom only you can heal, and let us love them in your name until they are whole. Mark Buchanan says, I had no response. I was undone. He had laid me bare, found me out, and exposed my fraudulence because I was the chief of sinners, because I had never prayed, not once, for God to bring such people to my church. So I went home and I repented and I stopped sinning and I began to cry out for those nobody wants. That's who we're to invite. But I think about it. And I get this. I love this parable. And I love what Jesus is saying. That honestly, none of us is worthy of a place of honor at the banquet, even if we merit an invitation at all. None of us are. But we are invited anyway. We're invited anyway to come to the table. Our pride, our sin, our shame, our guilt, all is forgiven. The great preacher from the last half of the 20th century, William Stone Coffin, says this about evangelism. He said evangelism is really pretty simple. Evangelism is one beggar telling another beggar where they got the bread. One beggar telling another beggar where they got the bread. You see, there's something special here at St. Andrew's, in this congregation, in this community that people need. And each of us is here because we found a place where we can get the bread. We found a community in which all are welcome. All are welcome. Everyone is welcome. Even us, even you, even me, us. In all of our woundedness and brokenness, we are welcome. And we all know somebody who hungers for that bread, but doesn't know where to get it. It's here. It's right here. It's acceptance, it's love, it's grace. It's right here among us. You are loved. You are accepted for who you are. And you are welcome at the banquet. So now, let's go. Let's go out into the highways and byways and find the other beggars and tell them where we found the bread. Would you pray with me? Gracious God, we thank you for your faithfulness to this congregation through the years and the ways that this church reaches out into the world to bring people in love and acceptance, a stand for justice and inclusion. Help us to be the ones, because we all know other beggars, so we can tell them where we got the bread. Hear us now as we join together in the prayer our Lord taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.